My 25F, ex-fiance, 31M, was using me to get close to my best friend, 25M, and I only found out after we got engaged. I'm not even sure where to start with this mess. I've been lurking on this sub for months, but never thought I'd be posting my own disaster. Sorry in advance for the novel, but I need to get this all out and maybe get some perspective from people who don't know us. So, this whole thing started about 3 years ago when I was 21 and fresh out of college. I just landed my first real job at a mid-sized tech company downtown. Classic story. I was one of three women in my department, youngest person by like 8 years, completely clueless about office politics. Enter Mark, 31M. He was this quiet, composed guy who seemed to have his shit together in a way that made me feel like I was still playing dress up in my mom's work clothes. Never loud, never dramatic, just steady. The kind of person who speaks when they have something worth saying and doesn't fill awkward silences with nervous chatter, unlike me. I developed what I thought was a harmless work crush. Nothing dramatic, I wasn't doodling his name or anything, but he represented everything I thought I wanted to be. Adult, competent, unflappable. Plus, he did these small, thoughtful things that made my heart skip. Like when I mentioned missing this specific honey lavender latte from my college town, and a week later there was a post-it on my desk with a local cafe recommendation. Small stuff, but it felt huge to someone who was used to being overlooked. The thing is, I was incredibly lonely. My college roommate had moved across the country, my other friends were scattered everywhere doing their own post-grad thing, and I was eating frozen dinners alone in a shitty studio apartment that smelled like the previous tenant's cat. Most nights I stayed late at the office just to avoid going home to silence. Liam, 25M, has been my best friend since we were 15. We met freshman year of high school when we got paired for a biology project, and from day one we just clicked. He's everything I'm not. Magnetic, effortlessly social, the kind of person who walks into a room and suddenly everyone's having more fun. But somehow we balance each other out. He makes me feel seen without having to perform, and I keep him grounded without being a buzzkill. People always assumed we were secretly in love or whatever, but it was never like that. I don't know how to explain it without sounding cheesy, but he's my person. We went through everything together. Shitty family stuff, heartbreaks, late-night existential crises, the works. We always said distance couldn't touch what we had. After college, he got this amazing job opportunity in another city, about 2 hours away. So for the first time since we were teenagers, we weren't living in the same place. It was harder than I expected. I'd gotten so used to having him as my bridge to the social world that without him, I felt like a background character in my own life. But that winter, he moved back. He'd found something permanent in our city and flew in just before the holidays. I was over the moon. Finally, I'd have my anchor back. My company's holiday party was one of those standard corporate affairs. Cheap wine, forced mingling, someone's boss playing DJ way too enthusiastically. Since we could bring guests, I asked Liam to come with me. I was nervous about these work events and figured having him there would make everything easier. The second he walked in with me, the whole energy shifted. I know that sounds dramatic, but if you've ever met someone like Liam, you get it. He just has this gravitational pull. Even the crustiest senior staff were cracking smiles and asking him questions. That's when Mark suddenly became interested in me. He came over to chat, asked about Liam, complimented me on bringing such an interesting friend. We ended up talking for like an hour, the longest conversation we'd ever had. I was thrilled. Finally, someone was seeing me, not just tolerating me. Except now I realize he wasn't seeing me at all. He was seeing Liam. After the party, Mark started pursuing me pretty actively. Coffee dates that turned into long walks, thoughtful texts, remembering little details about my day. It felt mature and intentional in a way I wasn't used to. No games, no mixed signals, just consistent interest from someone who seemed genuinely curious about me. I called Liam practically every night to debrief. He teased me about mystery accountant man, Mark worked in finance, and said it was about time someone realized how amazing I was. But looking back, he always sounded distracted during these calls. I figured he was just busy settling into his new job. Mark and I made it official after about a month of dating. Everything felt easy, almost suspiciously so. He was thoughtful, consistent, never pushed for more than I was ready to give. He watched my terrible reality shows without complaining, brought me coffee on rough mornings, remembered my work stress, and checked in about it later. But here's the thing I didn't notice at the time. He was always steering conversations back to Liam. Anytime I mentioned him, even in passing, Mark would lean in with these follow-up questions. What did Liam study? What kind of music does he like? How did we become so close? He'd laugh hardest at stories that involved Liam, ask to see old photos, even suggested we all hang out more as a group. At the time, I thought it was sweet, like he was trying to understand an important part of my life. I told myself it showed maturity. He wasn't threatened by my friendship. He wanted to embrace it. God, I was so fucking naive. About 6 months in, Mark's attitude toward my friendship with Liam started shifting. It wasn't dramatic or obvious, just subtle changes that were easy to rationalize. He'd get quiet when I mentioned plans with Liam. Not angry, just disappointed, like I'd let him down somehow. He started making comments like, "I thought we were going to spend tonight together," or, "You two have so many inside jokes, sometimes I feel left out." The kind of thing that sounds reasonable on the surface, but leaves you feeling guilty for wanting to see your friend. I started pulling back, not consciously at first, just little things. Putting off calling Liam back, declining invitations to hang out one-on-one, hesitating before including him in group plans. I told myself it was natural. I was in a serious relationship now. Priority shift, right? But it felt awful, like I was dimming something that had always been bright. There was this one moment when I realized I'd gone an entire week without talking to Liam, the first time that had happened since we met. When he finally texted to check in, I felt physically sick with guilt. The worst part was that creating distance from Liam didn't make my relationship with Mark feel more secure. It just made everything flatter, like I'd traded color for beige. After a few months of this weird tension, Mark brought up an idea over dinner one night. He said he'd been thinking about his jealousy issues and realized that maybe the problem wasn't me being too close to Liam. Maybe it was that he and Liam didn't have their own connection. "I think if Liam and I became friends independently of you, it would help," he said. "Like, make this whole thing less triangular, you know?" It sounded mature, healthy even, the kind of thing people in secure relationships do. I was relieved. Finally, a solution that didn't require me to choose sides. I mentioned it to Liam, and he agreed to hang out with Mark one-on-one. He wasn't thrilled about it. Liam's always been protective of our friendship time, but he said he'd give it a shot. They went out for drinks, then dinner the next week, then coffee a few days after that. Each time, I'd ask Liam how it went, and his responses got shorter and vaguer. Fine. It was okay. Kinda weird, but whatever. Then, Liam started declining Mark's invitations, and then he stopped coming to group events if he knew Mark would be there. When I'd try to make plans with him one-on-one, he'd reschedule or give vague excuses about being busy. I was losing my best friend, and I had no idea why. Mark was getting increasingly frustrated with the situation. He started blaming me for Liam's withdrawal, saying I hadn't managed the transition properly, that I'd made things awkward somehow. "You were supposed to help facilitate our friendship," he said during one particularly tense conversation. "Instead, you made him feel like he had to choose sides." But that wasn't what happened. I knew Liam, and something had spooked him during those one-on-one hangouts with Mark, something that made him want to put distance between all of us. I tried asking Liam directly, but he'd just say everything was fine and change the subject. I was stuck between my boyfriend blaming me for sabotaging his attempts at friendship and my best friend clearly avoiding us both. The guilt was eating me alive. I felt like I was failing everyone: Mark, Liam, myself. I started withdrawing from both of them, too overwhelmed to navigate the mess I'd apparently created. Looking back, there were so many signs I missed or explained away. Mark asking to see my old photo albums and spending way more time on pictures that included Liam. Him knowing details about Liam's social media posts that I hadn't mentioned. The way he'd position himself between us at group events. How he always seemed to know Liam's schedule better than I did. His intense interest in Liam's hobbies, tastes, opinions, way beyond normal getting to know your girlfriend's friend territory. I chalked it all up to insecurity or overcompensation. I wanted so badly to believe I was in a healthy relationship with a good man that I ignored every instinct telling me something was off. 2 years into our relationship, Mark proposed. It was everything I thought I wanted. Thoughtful, private, with a ring he'd clearly put effort into choosing. He talked about our future, our partnership, how he couldn't imagine his life without me. I said yes because it felt like the next logical step. We lived together, we got along well when we weren't dealing with the Liam situation, and he was stable and kind. I convinced myself that the flat feeling in my chest was just nerves, not doubt. But even during the proposal, he brought up Liam. He said he hoped our engagement might help heal whatever went wrong with that friendship. That maybe now Liam would see how serious we were and want to be part of our lives again. It was such a weird thing to focus on during what should have been our moment. But I was so desperate to fix things with Liam that I latched onto it. Maybe Mark was right. Maybe an engagement would signal to Liam that this was permanent, that he didn't need to feel threatened or whatever was going on in his head. I called Liam that night to tell him about the engagement. He congratulated me, but there was something hollow in his voice, like he was reading from a script. "Are you happy?" he asked, and I couldn't figure out why the question hit me so hard. "Of course," I said. "Why wouldn't I be?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Just making sure." Things continued to deteriorate over the next few months. Mark became increasingly obsessed with fixing the Liam situation. He'd bring it up constantly, wondering what Liam was doing, whether he was seeing anyone, if he'd responded to the wedding invitation we'd sent. He RSVP'd yes, but with no +1, which Mark analyzed endlessly. I started feeling like I was living with someone who was more invested in my best friend's life than in our actual relationship. Our conversations always circled back to Liam. Our future plans always included speculation about whether Liam would be involved. It was becoming unbearable, but I didn't know how to address it without sounding paranoid or jealous. How do you tell your fiance he's too interested in your friend, especially when that friend has been pulling away for mysterious reasons? Then I found the folder. Mark had left his laptop open while he took a shower, something he never did. He was always careful about his devices, password protecting everything, but there it was, unlocked on our kitchen table. I'm not proud of what I did next. I shouldn't have snooped, but something in my gut was screaming that I needed to know what was on there. Most of it was normal work stuff, boring financial documents, client files, email drafts. I was starting to feel guilty for violating his privacy when I found it. A folder buried deep in his file system with a random alphanumeric name. Inside were hundreds of photos of Liam. Not just normal group photos or party pictures, candid shots taken without Liam's knowledge. Photos cropped to focus only on his face. Screenshots from his social media accounts going back years. Some looked like they'd been taken with a telephoto lens from across the street. And then there were the drawings. Dozens of sketches of Liam in various poses, some clearly referenced from the photos, others that seemed to be from Mark's imagination. They ranged from rough pencil sketches to detailed digital artwork. All of Liam. All created without his knowledge or consent. I sat there staring at the screen, feeling like I was going to throw up. This wasn't just a crush or even an obsession. This was stalking. Systematic, careful, long-term stalking of my best friend. And I had been the unwitting accomplice, providing access and information for almost 3 years. I confronted Mark that evening. I didn't beat around the bush. I told him I'd seen the folder and demanded an explanation. He was calm at first, too calm, like he'd been preparing for this conversation. "It's not what you think," he said. "I'm an artist, you know that. Liam has interesting features, good bone structure. I was using him as a reference for some portrait work." I asked why he'd never mentioned this portrait work before, why the photos were taken without Liam's knowledge, why he'd never asked permission to use his likeness. The excuses kept coming, each one more ridiculous than the last. It was for a class he was taking, it was meant to be a surprise gift, it was just practice sketches that got out of hand. Finally, I cut through the bullshit. "Mark, some of these photos were taken through windows, from across the street, while he was on private phone calls. This isn't art, this is stalking." That's when his composure cracked. "You don't understand," he said, and suddenly his voice was different, desperate. "I never meant for it to go this far, but he's perfect, isn't he? The way he moves, the way he talks, even the way he thinks. I couldn't stop watching him. I couldn't stop wanting to be close to him." The room went dead silent. "I thought if I dated you, I could figure out how to be like him, or at least be around him more. But then he started pulling away, and I realized I was losing my chance to really know him, and I panicked. I felt like I was going to faint. So what? You pretended to love me for 3 years just to stalk my best friend?" "I do love you," he said quickly, "but not the way I—" He stopped himself, but the damage was done. Not the way he loved Liam, that's what he was going to say. I told Mark he had 24 hours to move out, or I was going to the police, and his employer, and anyone else who would listen. He tried to argue, to explain, to minimize what he'd done, but I was done listening. I packed a bag and went to stay at my sister's place across town. When I came back 2 days later, he was gone. Along with his clothes, his art supplies, and, I discovered later, several items that belonged to Liam. A hoodie he'd left at our place years ago, a book he'd loaned me, a coffee mug he'd used during one of our old group hangouts. I found out later that Mark had quit his job and left town entirely. No forwarding address, no goodbye note, nothing. Just gone. I should have felt relieved, but mostly I felt nauseous and terrified because I realized I had to tell Liam everything. I called Liam and asked if we could meet in person. He agreed, though he sounded hesitant. We hadn't really talked in months, and I could tell he was being careful with me. We met at our old coffee spot, neutral territory that felt safe for both of us. I brought printouts of some of the photos and sketches, though I couldn't bring myself to show him the worst ones. "Liam," I started, "I need to tell you something about Mark, and it's going to sound insane." I laid it all out. The hidden folder, the photos taken without his knowledge, the drawings, Mark's confession about his real motivations for dating me. I watched Liam's face go through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, disgust, and finally, recognition. "Oh my God," he said quietly. "That explains so much." Turns out, Liam had figured out something was wrong during those one-on-one hangouts with Mark. Mark had been way too interested in personal details, asked inappropriate questions about Liam's dating life and daily routines, and had a weird intensity that made Liam deeply uncomfortable. "He kept asking about your apartment layout," Liam said, like which room was yours, whether you could see the street from your bedroom window. And he wanted to know my work schedule, where I went to the gym, what time I usually got home. I thought he was just socially awkward, but it felt predatory. Liam had pulled away from both of us because he didn't want to cause drama in my relationship, but he also couldn't shake the feeling that Mark was dangerous. He'd been trying to protect me by creating distance, hoping Mark would lose interest and move on. "I should have said something," he said, looking miserable. I should have warned you. I should have listened, I replied. I should have trusted my instincts. We both cried. For the friendship that had been damaged, for the time we'd lost, for the violation of privacy and trust that Mark had inflicted on both of us. That was 6 months ago. Mark hasn't tried to contact either of us, and I'm hoping it stays that way. I filed a police report about the stalking, but without evidence of physical threats or recent contact, there wasn't much they could do. At least there's a paper trail now if he ever resurfaces. Liam and I are rebuilding our friendship slowly. There's still some awkwardness. We both feel guilty about how we handled things, and it's going to take time to fully trust each other again. But we're working on it. The hardest part is dealing with my own feelings of betrayal and stupidity. I spent 3 years of my life with someone who was using me as a front to stalk my best friend. I ignored red flags, rationalized concerning behavior, and nearly lost the most important relationship in my life because I was so desperate to be loved that I accepted a counterfeit version. I'm in therapy now, trying to work through the trust issues and figure out how to recognize genuine connection versus manipulation. My therapist says it's common for victims of this kind of deception to blame themselves, but intellectually knowing that doesn't make the shame go away. Here's the part that's going to sound like something out of a movie, but I swear it's real. About 2 months ago, as Liam and I were working through all this trauma together, something shifted between us. All those people who used to joke that we were secretly in love, turns out they might have been onto something. I don't know if it's just the intensity of what we've been through, or if removing Mark's toxic influence allowed us to see each other clearly for the first time, but feelings developed. Real ones. On both sides. We're taking it incredibly slowly. Neither of us wants to fuck up the friendship that survived everything else. But there's something there that feels different from anything I experienced with Mark. Genuine. Based on actually knowing each other, not on projection or obsession. It's terrifying and wonderful and complicated as hell. Update. Holy shit, you guys. I was not expecting this to blow up like it has. Thank you for all the support and advice. I'm trying to read through all the comments. A few people have asked for clarification on some points. How did you not know your fiancé was gay, bi? Honestly, I don't think Mark's sexuality is the main issue here. He might be gay, bi, or just had an unhealthy fixation on one specific person. The problem was the deception and stalking, not his sexual orientation. Plenty of LGBTQ+ people manage to figure out their identity without manipulating and violating others. Why didn't Liam tell you sooner? He's explained this to me, and I get it now. When someone makes you uncomfortable but you can't point to anything overtly threatening, it's hard to know how to bring it up, especially when it involves your friend's serious relationship. Liam was worried he'd sound paranoid or jealous. He also didn't know about the photos and drawings. He just knew Mark gave him creepy vibes. One more thing. Several people have DM'd me asking if I think Mark might do this to someone else. The honest answer is yes. I think he probably will. Obsessions like this don't just disappear. I've been trying to figure out if there's a way to warn future potential victims, but I don't know how you'd even go about that. If anyone has experience with this kind of situation and has advice on how to protect others from someone like Mark, please let me know. Thanks again for all the support. This community has been incredibly helpful in making me feel less alone and crazy.